Hello, and welcome to the Chemical Transformations podcast. I'm your host, Matt Dixon, and today I'm joined by Steve Holland. Hi, Steve. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. How you doing, Matt?
Good morning. Very good, thanks. And welcome to our podcast. Although I think because we're trialing video today, it might technically be known as a vodcast, but I think that's gone beyond my realm of knowledge of these things. But yeah. Okay. And I think most people watching this will know Steve Holland from his time at Brenntag. I thought you originally started at a place called Allied Colloids in the late 70s.
Yes, that's a long time ago, and I think now actually maybe BASF. I think it's now its current.
Most people will have heard of.
Yeah, but. I was CEO of Brenntag for about 9 years after they actually acquired a business which I owned in the UK called Albion Chemicals, and it was one of those things where I was pretty certain I was going to be heading for the beach fairly soon after that acquisition, but the industry, it's a great business to be in, and they managed to persuade me to stay, and I had a fabulous time being in charge. I thought it was a pretty good company.
Yeah, well, I was looking at the dates. It seemed to be made pretty sharp progression up the ranks. So the sale was in about 2006, and then you became CEO in 2011.
That's right. Yes, I think it was sales in 2006, and I became CEO of Brenntag Europe in 2007. Then the COO for the group a couple of years later. Then we floated the business, and I became CEO. So I was pretty busy.
CEO for almost a decade. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And what would you, when you look back on that time, what's the thing you sort of look back on most fondly? Or are you proud?
Well, obviously, this is a great business to be in, and I think sometimes people who when they ask you what do you do for a living, you say, well, you work in chemical distribution. It doesn't sound the sexiest industry in the world, but honestly, there's some amazing people in it, and so I had the great privilege to work with not only people at Brenntag, but also in the industry generally. And I think probably the most satisfying thing for me was rolling essentially Brenntag out into a more global company and introducing Asia Pacific to that company over that decade. It was pretty rewarding.
Yeah, and that I suppose fits quite nicely what we're going to talk about today, because one of the things in your article was talking about local distribution and manufacturing and how that interacts with a more international market. We'll come on to that. And so what have you been doing since?
Since I left Brenntag, I was not really planning to do very, very much, but in the end, I have actually been drawn back into the industry because I was pleasantly surprised how many people were interested in what I had to offer in terms of helping with strategic advice in terms of the way businesses operate and what have you, and M&A and then analysing some of the financial performance of some of the other players. So I think it turned out I was going to be drawn back into the industry whether I planned to or not, and clearly I really enjoy the business. I've always had a passion for chemical distribution, so I'm not complaining too much.
Yeah, always good to do something you enjoy.
Absolutely.
Yes, that brings us on nicely to your article. So what's it about?
Well, I thought I'd just to put an article together because at the moment we're in a sort of rather strange time in some respects, because clearly the markets are very turbulent, and the crisis that the COVID has created has created a new dynamic in the market, which I would say almost all chemical distributors will probably be benefiting from the current crisis, insofar as the business models are very resilient and they're very adaptive to the circumstances. And whilst it's great to see that resilience in the market and the performance, which you can see in the numbers from the public companies, it's very, very important not to assume this is some sort of norm, and you should be looking very, very seriously at the future post the current crisis.
Yeah. And I suppose you probably got good insight into what Brenntag might be thinking, and some of the larger companies that obviously publish their strategy. And
Yeah.
do you think it's important to keep an eye on those for some of the smaller companies that might be out there?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the larger chemical distributors do have an influence on the shape of the market in terms of what the market might expect in the future. And clearly, any smaller or mid-sized chemical distributor has to compete with these larger players. Having said that, I think agility and service remain a very strong card to play in all elements of chemical distribution, and that's why it remains so fragmented. And so, whilst the larger players may have certain size and certain critical mass, I don't believe it's at all a situation where the smaller or mid-sized chemical distributor should feel intimidated by that. In fact, in many respects, it actually enhances the position for distribution in the eyes of manufacturers.
Yeah. So one of the conclusions of your article is that people need to look at their most sort of effective route to market, their best delivery system, and whether that is sort of an internationally coordinated large player or a niche market local distributor. You just got to make the best decision with what you have. It's not necessarily one or the other in all situations.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the only difference between small, mid-sized chemical distributors and the larger guys is that it's maybe more a case of the bandwidth of management that can actually spend the time doing that is probably greater within the larger distributors by sheer scale. And so it's important that if you're a small to mid-sized regional player, that you either concentrate some of your resources on future planning or get help to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And who are the kind of people you'd look to for help? It's not a leading question at all, Steve.
No. Well, at the end of the day, I think it's important that if you're going to call for help, then you need to talk to people who are able to actually identify with you as a business and not be drawn into the much larger consultants where they really are looking at the global supersized businesses. And so I think it's very important to approach that. If you're going to approach outside help, is to get the right shape of organization to do that.
Sure. And you get this nice little picture of, I think one of the things you comment in your article is about the shape of the industry and how a good 70% of it is made up of these smaller businesses. There's lots of them out there. It's quite fragmented. And I like one of the stats you have, the number of companies that you'd acquired when you were at Brenntag. Was it 62, I think you had? Or was it even more?
Yeah. Yes. Quite a few.
And so I guess one of the challenges there is, as you say, that if these smaller niche players are focusing on their niche and really concentrating on that, then how do they become part of a larger business like Brenntag? And how do you manage that? So I think one of the things you're quite proud of how you'd managed the cultural shift from individual players to being part of the larger company.
Yeah, I think these clearly, when businesses are acquired by larger groups, then that's quite a change for them, and sometimes it's actually quite stressful from a point of view of integrating systems and all that sort of stuff. But I'm really still enthused about the chemical distribution sector. Has some amazing businesses out there, which frankly I'm not sure will ever be acquired by larger distributors because they're just too strong as regional players. And I won't name them particularly because that's probably not appropriate. But the opportunity to run a very successful regional business with proper underlying growth within it to drive the future of that business remains there today as it always has. And so just being acquired by a larger group isn't the natural evolution of small chemical distributors. The distributors themselves do have an opportunity to continue to grow organically and indeed make acquisitions themselves.
Yeah, certainly some of them almost trade on the fact that they are independent. And so, yes.
Exactly. And, there's all this thing about, are you too big to care, as it were, scenario, which is I used to hate that sort of would perhaps accuse me of even. And, and of course, that isn't the case, that the larger distributors are too big to care, but it does emphasize the fact that focus on regional markets and being absolutely the best distributor in that market still really matters.
Yeah, we're certainly working with one or two that are, they're looking to expand. Maybe they're family owned or they've been privately run for a very long time. No intention of selling out, but still keen on, as you say, buying things and expanding. And I guess that's what the article is aimed at. These kind of guys, the kind of things that they should be looking at in terms of their own growth. So, are there any kind of major trends that you've been thinking about, or that people should be following? Flash in the pans or longer term stuff?
Well, look, I think the thrust of the article, which I guess the points I'm trying to move across and to the reader, is that where we are today. To some extent, it's a situation where distributors have very positive cash flows, they have high margins, the businesses are doing very well. But at the same time, it's a very high stress load on distributors because they're trying to juggle with shortages in products, real demands in the supply chain, and in smaller to mid-sized businesses, sometimes this can be all-consuming. And I guess my message is, whilst it's all-consuming right now, this is going to change in the future, and you need to be ready for that future. And just if you're making your way through the day-to-day and servicing customers as well, the best you can, is clearly important, but it's equally important to have a view of what's going on over the horizon. And that's really what I'm trying to get to here. And I think there is a danger that in the maybe not that distant future, we'll see quite a change in the dynamics of the markets. For example, you will see probably volumes increasing with customers, margins being lower. You'll see an increase in supply from suppliers, so the supply chain will ease, and so the more competitive and more normalized position in chemical distribution will return, and therefore you will see a change in the dynamics of both the large distributors and the smaller distributors. So what happens next? And I think that's the important thing: is where are we now, where are we going, and how are we going to get there? Needs to be thought about on a good continuous basis.
And I would guess that for every business is unique. They're all different. They will have a different landscape that they're dealing with. They might have different sale messages to their clients. These are the things they're really trading on. And so with a tumultuous market, everything changing and dynamic, each one's going to have to deal with that in their own way. So it's a bit difficult to have a one size fits all strategy.
It is. Everyone's got their individual strengths and weaknesses, and I think probably what I would have tried to prompt from this article is actually just to re-examine those cherished assumptions about your business. And it's amazing when we compare our performance, we generally look at a data point which is fixed in the past. That's where we were. Where are we now? And what progress has been made, positive or negative, and that I feel like is a measure of our performance. And I think my challenge really is that these data points in the past can be somewhat misleading, and quite often I've seen markets being completely missed or underdeveloped by virtue of a misunderstanding of what market is addressable by a company. And I make me smile. It makes me smile actually from time to time. I used to refer to this with my former company, that you'd have the Bermuda Triangle effect, and this way I would describe as in this 25 square kilometers there are no sales of the following products, and of course it's clearly not true. But there have been never any sales of these products in this 25 kilometers, which again is an incredible scenario. And so it's that sort of thing where people are assuming because there was no sales in this square, this area, that there wasn't any business, and clearly there is business. And it's this sort of cherished assumptions that if we're not careful can become more ingrained into business, and as a result of that, miss an opportunity.
So how do you get away from cherished assumptions?
Well, it's pretty hard in some respects, because you have to look in the mirror and just have a recheck and have a reality check. Do we really understand our markets? Do we really understand what services we're providing our customers? And and where is what is the competitive profile within that market? How many times have you been to a meeting or with a distributor or with a larger company, maybe a regional operating company? So let's talk about your major competitors and where they are, who are their largest accounts, and what product ranges are they supplying there? And there's sometimes a few blank looks around the table saying we're not absolutely sure where our competitors are in this area. And if you don't know, then that's probably a bit of an indicator that you should be perhaps understanding your market a little bit more effectively than you do. And I'm afraid that is not a small or medium-sized company problem. It also happens in the larger companies.
Yeah. So one of the things just to talk about me for a second, one of the things I enjoy the most about my job is when you go in and you ask all the questions that people have not really thought about for many years, and you're sort of giving them a bit of a rundown and investigating their business to work out what are the strengths, weaknesses. And as you say, there's some aspects of their businesses that they've known about for 10 years and not really thought about. And you get to re-examine it and open it all up, almost like being a professional layman and asking the stupid questions. And
well, yeah, I think most of the time as chief executive of Brenntag, I'm always asking the stupid question, and trying to find the obvious answer, which sometimes wasn't there. And I think one of the things which, again, when just if you look at the current crisis, we are looking at a fairly high volume drop in certain markets due to supply chain difficulties or straightforward demand. And the great danger we have right now is you can easily explain away a volume drop in the current circumstances. But my question is it true? Is it for the reasons you've just attributed to it, this cherished assumption? The reason we're not selling this product is because of these circumstances. Well, it may not necessarily be true. And it's these sort of challenges you need to keep making of your business to make sure you're not missing a quite important deviation in your business performance and attributing that to something which is easily explained. And I think this is the sort of thing, again, I would ask people to look at and say, look, let's make sure you're not making assumptions which are actually untrue.
So something like, you might excuse reduced sales because someone is stockpiling or running down stocks rather, and whereas actually they've shifted completely to a different product or a different market, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, for a very, very good point. And if you think about the situation we find ourselves in right now, there's probably quite a few customers out there that have reformulated, and they've found themselves we cannot be in a position where there's a shortage of this particular product, and no one can get hold of it, or we have restricted access to this product, and it's really damaging our business. And so they're reformulating away. Are you alive to that situation? If you're not alive to it, then the only time you'll find out is when the orders stop coming in. So I think that's really the thrust of this is making sure that you are not anchoring yourself into a false sense of security by making these assumptions which may not be true.
Yeah. No, it's something to keep an eye on. So if you were to sum up your article, are there sort of three things that you would? Someone asked me to sum it up in a couple of sentences. What are the top takeaways?
Well, I think the top takeaways are right now. We're in an unusual situation in terms of the markets are particularly resilient for chemical distributors. We're looking at a good, strong margin mix. We're looking at some challenging supply chains. We're looking at very good cash flow scenarios. All that's going to change. It's all going to change. Prices will come down. The supply chains will free up. Margins will probably weaken somewhat. Cash will reverse in terms of there will be a reinvestment in stock and reinvestment in debtors and what have you. So, whatever is existing right now, we know it's going to change, and you need to be ready for that. I would also say that it's really important that when any company is looking at their strategy and their plan going forward, is that they keep looking at their assumptions and rechecking, are they really true? And is it just the case that we're planning our future based on data from the past, when the data from the past may well have been wrong? And that's that happens in all sizes of companies. I think in terms of the thrust of this particular article, I think for small and medium-sized companies, they should really not underestimate that agility, service really trumps price and size. And so if you're able to create a business model which actually keeps delivering innovation, agility, and service, then you really are positioning your business for success, even against the largest competitors.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve.
Pleasure.